For most people, the ninja is a creature of myth, a silent assassin clad in black, capable of scaling walls, vanishing into shadows, and striking with uncanny precision. But here's a stunning, historically verified fact for you. For 2 centuries in feudal Japan, there existed a very real, highly organized force, comprised of the Shinobi clans from the Iga and Kōga provinces. This force was so devastatingly effective that its actions routinely tipped the scales of war and sealed the fates of powerful daimyo. It was arguably the most sophisticated intelligence and covert operations machine of its era. And here lies the central paradox. Following the unification of Japan, this elusive and all-pervasive power virtually vanished from the historical stage without a trace. It didn't merely suffer defeat, it evaporated, as if it had never existed at all. How could this be? We're not talking about an army that could be routed in open battle, nor a fortress that could be taken by storm. Rather, we're discussing a decentralized network of professionals whose primary strength lay in their invisibility and their ability to embed themselves into any social fabric. They were everywhere and nowhere all at once. They moved among us as merchants, monks, peasants, actors. To eradicate them would have meant tearing apart the very fabric of the society they had infiltrated. Yet, by the dawn of the Edo period, the era of great peace, the former might of the Iga and Kōga clans had vanished without a trace. The story of their disappearance is a mystery far deeper and more intricate than any Hollywood myth about their legendary prowess. So, let's clarify the genre of our narrative right from the start. This won't be an action flick about secret killing techniques or a retelling of fantastic legends. Instead, it will be an epic drama chronicling the clash of 2 worldviews, the realm of chaos that birthed the ninja and the world of total order that ultimately annihilated them. This is an intellectual inquiry into how a unique military and social technology, honed over centuries, became in a single instant not merely useless, but mortally perilous for its very practitioners. We will delve not so much into how they killed, but why they were destined for extinction. What strikes me most profoundly here isn't the sheer fact of their existence or their incredible skills, which we will certainly discuss later. Rather, it's the brutal and inexorable logic of history that simply erased them. Their deadliest foe wasn't a specific warlord or a rival clan. Their deadliest foe became peace itself. The advent of a long, centralized era of peace rendered their unique talents, born of an age of endless warfare and fragmentation, utterly obsolete. Their story proves that even the most perfected system for survival in chaos is utterly defenseless in the face of order. Our journey will rely not on folklore, but on genuine historical documents, paramount among them the astonishing scroll known as the Bansen Shukai, a veritable encyclopedia of ninjutsu. This text, penned during the twilight of the Shinobi era, represents a desperate effort to preserve knowledge that was rapidly fading into oblivion. And it unveils a radically different picture for us. The ninja were not mystics, but pragmatists to their very core, engineers, chemists, psychologists, and masters of social manipulation, whose true power lay in knowledge, not magic. I therefore invite you to become not merely a spectator, but an active participant in this historical inquiry. Together, we will endeavor to decipher ancient texts, dissect political intrigues, and comprehend the underlying logic behind one of the most enigmatic disappearances in global military history. We embark on a quest for a lost world, aiming to understand why Japan's most dangerous shadows were compelled to vanish forever from the stage, the moment the sun of a new order rose over the nation. To truly grasp who the Shinobi were, you must first feel the essence of their world. Let's momentarily cast aside the neon-drenched streets of Tokyo and transport ourselves to 16th century Japan, specifically to the mountainous Iga province. Imagine standing on a forest trail. The air here doesn't smell of exhaust fumes. Instead, it's thick and humid, saturated with the scent of wet earth, the deep aroma of cryptomeria pines, and the pungent tang of smoke from distant rice-cooking fires. In summer, the silence is shattered by the deafening chorus of cicadas, blending with the rustle of bamboo and the murmur of mountain streams. But this isn't a tranquil landscape. This is a workspace. Listen closely, and you might discern the creak of leather straps, the dull thud of wood against wood. Warriors are training, and the distant, barely perceptible whinny of horses. At night, the world transforms. In place of cicadas, there's a chorus of frogs and the crackle of branches under cautious footsteps. Every creak of a floorboard in a home, every dog's bark in the village, it's not just a sound, it's information. This is a world of total awareness, where survival hinges on the ability to hear, smell, and see what remains hidden from others. This world operated under laws that are difficult for modern people to comprehend. To decipher it, one must understand several key codes woven into the consciousness of people from that era. The first and most crucial code is Gekkokujo, which can be translated as the low overthrow the high. The Sengoku period was a time of utter social chaos, when yesterday's peasant could become a general and a vassal could slay his lord and seize his position. Loyalty was situational, alliances temporary, and betrayal a way of life. In such a world, traditional samurai honor often proved to be a fatal weakness. Information about a neighbor's intentions, about a conspiracy within one's own castle, about enemy army morale became the primary resource, more valuable than gold or rice. It was precisely this bloody chaos that created the demand for the services of those who could acquire such information at any cost. The second code, which defined the shinobi themselves, is the kanji character nin. It forms the core of the word ninja. Often translated as perseverance or stealth, its meaning is far deeper. Nin is a philosophy of survival through absolute self-control and the suppression of one's own ego for the sake of accomplishing a task. It's the ability to play the role of a wandering monk for years to gain an enemy's trust. It's the capacity to lie in a drainage ditch for hours, awaiting the perfect moment. It's the readiness to endure humiliation, hunger, and pain while maintaining a cool composure. If the samurai code of Bushido demanded a readiness to die beautifully, the philosophy of nin demanded a readiness to survive at any cost, even the most undignified. For the shinobi, the objective was always more important than the ritual, and the outcome more vital than the process. This is why any attempt to categorize them within the familiar boxes of warriors or assassins falls short. They were something entirely different, and to grasp their essence, we need a precise and confident analogy from our own world. The Iga and Kōga clans were, in essence, history's first private military companies, but with a functional scope that today would be distributed among the CIA, special forces, and a risk management consulting agency. They didn't maintain vast armies, they offered turnkey solutions to specific problems. Need to sow panic in enemy ranks before a battle? Need to uncover which vassals are plotting betrayal? Need to eliminate a charismatic leader to scatter his army? They were specialists in asymmetric responses. They weren't a caste, but rather a corporation, a guild of professionals who passed their knowledge down through generations. Their Iga province, encircled by mountains, served as both their natural fortress and their training ground. They were ordinary landowners, the Ji-samurai, who, in response to constant threats from larger neighbors, transformed the art of defending their land into a deadly science. They were not demons from the underworld. They were pragmatists, honed to perfection by a brutal era. So, when we speak of ninja, we are not speaking of magic. We are speaking of technology, of social, psychological, and military technology, born in unique circumstances and perfectly adapted for survival in an age when the world had gone mad. They were a product of chaos, and as we will see, this very fact sealed their tragic fate when chaos began to recede. The genesis, the very catalyst that ignited this unique historical chain reaction, was geography compounded by desperation. The provinces of Iga and Kōga are mountainous, rugged regions, a veritable labyrinth of valleys, forests, and gorges. For large samurai armies accustomed to battling on open plains, this terrain was a logistical nightmare. But for the local inhabitants, the small landowners known as G-samurai, these mountains were their sole chance for survival. They found themselves caught between a rock and a hard place, the ambitions of powerful clans eager to swallow their lands. They faced a stark choice: either be wiped off the face of the earth by superior forces or invent something entirely new. They couldn't afford the luxury of open battle. They couldn't field an army of equal strength. And so, they made the only move possible. They changed the rules of the game entirely. It was right here, in these isolated mountain communities, that a grand idea was born, the true engine of this history. An idea that for its time was not just audacious, but revolutionary, even heretical. In a world where martial prowess was measured by honor, ritual, and the ability to die beautifully in battle for all to see, they proposed a diametrically opposed philosophy. Their core concept was that the supreme victory is one achieved without a fight. Power lay not in the sharpness of a sword, but in information. Glory was not in a heroic death, but in the successful completion of a mission and returning home alive. They shifted the focus from physical confrontation to psychological warfare, from battle tactics to the strategy of deception. This was an entirely new type of thinking, one that utterly shattered the samurai code of Bushido. What did this mean in practice? It meant that the primary weapon became not the katana, but knowledge. Knowledge of topography, knowledge of the enemy's psychology, knowledge of their weaknesses, their fears, their ambitions. The art of shinobi was the art of gathering and utilizing this information. They created the first comprehensive intelligence networks in history. They perfectly mastered the art of hensojutsu, disguise and impersonation. A ninja could live for years disguised as a merchant, a monk, an actor, or a carpenter, gathering intelligence, building an agent network within an enemy castle, only to open the gates at the opportune moment, or sow panic with a single, well-placed rumor. They were not so much assassins as they were social engineers. And there isn't one hero, one genius who invented this system. The hero was the people themselves, the collective intelligence of the Iga and Kōga communities. Their system wasn't born from a top-down command, but organically, from the bottom up, like an immune response to a constant external threat. This was a unique form of societal self-organization, where every inhabitant was part of a collective defensive system. Their homes were designed with secret passages and traps. Their knowledge of the local forests and mountains was absolute. Their training began in childhood, transforming ordinary peasant sons into the most versatile specialists in survival and unconventional warfare. The reaction of the surrounding world, the world of the great samurai clans, was predictable and dualistic. On one hand, fear and disdain. For a noble samurai, the methods of the shinobi were the epitome of dishonor. A stab in the back, poison, deception, sabotage, all were considered dirty work, unworthy of a true warrior. Thus, ninja were demonized. Rumors spread that they possessed black magic, could become invisible, and made deals with Tengu demons. This was a convenient explanation for their supernatural effectiveness, allowing samurai to avoid acknowledging their own tactical rigidity and vulnerability. But on the other hand, beneath this public contempt lay a cold, pragmatic necessity. Daimyo, who publicly decried the ninjas' dishonor, secretly sent messengers to them with bags of gold. Because in the brutal reality of the Sengoku period, victory was more important than honor. And when it was necessary to eliminate an enemy commander, burn supply depots, or uncover an opponent's plans, the services of the Iga and Kōga clans became invaluable. They became the shadow instrument of grand politics, a secret weapon that everyone wanted in their arsenal, but one that no one wanted to admit possessing. It wasn't so much a sudden explosion, but rather a slow-acting poison. The emergence of the ninja on the battlefield irrevocably transformed warfare itself. They introduced a new, unpredictable variable into the equation: absolute paranoia. Every daimyo was now forced to confront unsettling questions. Was the new gardener secretly an infiltrator? Could the monk begging at the gates truly be trusted? Had their most loyal advisor been compromised? The ninja didn't target armies. They targeted trust, the very bedrock of the feudal system. And herein lay their true revolutionary genius. How, you might ask, did they achieve such feats? How could a mere handful of individuals from a secluded province strike terror into the hearts of mighty samurai armies? The answer is straightforward, devoid of even a whisper of mysticism. The marvel of their effectiveness was a marvel of engineering ingenuity. Their central metaphor wasn't an army, it was a virus. A social virus, perfectly engineered to infiltrate larger, more unwieldy organisms, enemy clans, castles, cities, and dismantle them from within, leveraging their own resources and vulnerabilities. The ninja didn't counter force with force. They countered brute strength with complexity and adaptability. This was asymmetric warfare in its purest form. Let's peer under the hood of this incredible machine, shall we? Its primary mechanism was called Hensojutsu, the art of complete metamorphosis. And this was no mere costume change, it was a total immersion in character. The popular image of the ninja in a black shinobi shozoku costume tells only a fraction of the story. That was their work uniform for nocturnal operations. By day, their chief weapon was inconspicuousness. They masterfully employed 7 guises: the wandering komuso monk, the samurai, the merchant, the yamabushi ascetic, the actor, the artisan, and the commoner. Each role was a key, unlocking specific doors. A monk could travel freely across the land and enter castles, begging for alms. A merchant gained access to markets and trade guilds where all rumors circulated. An actor could entertain guards, lulling them into a false sense of security. This was a one-person theater, where the stakes were life itself and the stage was all of Japan. The second mechanism was the art of infiltration, or shinobi iri. And like the first, it wasn't founded on magic, but on a meticulous study of architecture, psychology, and nature. Before even attempting to infiltrate a castle, ninja would spend months scrutinizing it. They knew the guard rotation schedules, the blind spots in sentry vision, and the weak points in the walls. They leveraged the weather as an ally. Torrential rain or hurricane-force winds masked their movements and distracted the guards. Their arsenal comprised ingeniously simple tools: collapsible ladders, grappling hooks on ropes, spikes for scaling walls, and even specialized devices for silently drilling holes into walls to eavesdrop or deploy a blowgun with a poisoned dart. This was the work not of an acrobat, but of a master safecracker and engineer. And what of their legendary magic, the smoke bombs and poisons? This was simply applied chemistry, far ahead of its time. Their treatise, the Bansen Shukai, contains dozens of recipes that today read like a textbook on pyrotechnics and toxicology. Smoke screens, which allowed them to vanish, were concocted from mixtures based on saltpeter, sulfur, and charcoal, essentially a primitive form of gunpowder. Blinding powders, or metsubushi, were caustic concoctions of ash, ground pepper, and sometimes even fine metal filings, hurled into an enemy's face to buy precious seconds for escape or counterattack. Their poisons weren't sorcerous brews, but carefully formulated concentrates of arsenic, aconite, and plant-derived toxins. No incantations, just knowledge and precise calculation. Let's visualize a typical operation, shall we? Step 1. Reconnaissance and infiltration. Several months before the start of a military campaign, a troupe of wandering performers would arrive in the town, hosting the enemy castle. They would entertain the populace and the guards alike, gathering intelligence, studying the terrain, noting vulnerabilities, and perhaps even recruiting discontented locals. They were the clan's eyes and ears. Step 2. Penetration. On the night before a decisive battle, under the cover of a thunderstorm, a lone specialist, utilizing the data gathered by the performers, would slip into the castle. He wouldn't engage in combat. His mission wasn't to kill, but to sow chaos. Step 3. The precision strike. He doesn't attempt to assassinate the general in his quarters. That's too risky and inefficient. Instead, he sets fire to the food stores and the armory filled with arrows. Simultaneously, his confederates in the city begin spreading rumors that the castle is ablaze because the garrison commander sold out to the enemy and is trying to cover his tracks. Step 4. The retreat and psychological fallout. The agent silently exits the castle, leaving behind panic and paranoia. By morning, the enemy army is demoralized. They have no food, no arrows, and they no longer trust their own commander. The army is paralyzed even before the first battle horn has sounded. This, then, was the mechanics of the miracle. It operated not on the battlefield, but within the minds of the adversary. The ninjas' strength wasn't in their muscles or their swords, but in their systemic approach. They were masters of information management, psychological warfare experts, and engineers of chaos. They exploited the feudal system, using its own protocols, trust, hierarchy, honor, against itself. Their art wasn't the art of killing, it was the art of making the enemy destroy themselves. We marvel at the genius of their operations, yet we often overlook the human cost behind them. Let's momentarily step away from strategy and consider the experience of an ordinary shinobi. And here's a fact that helps us grasp the sheer scale of this phenomenon. A successful intelligence mission to infiltrate an enemy clan could last not days or months, but years, 10 years. Imagine a young man from Iga who travels to a foreign city disguised as, say, a fabric dyer. He doesn't merely play a role, he becomes that dyer. He masters the craft down to its minutiae, marries a local woman, has children who never truly know who their father is. He becomes a respected member of the community, pays taxes, participates in local festivals, and all of this for one singular purpose: to one night gain access to castle blueprints, or overhear a critical conversation, or open the gates for an advancing army. This is an act not of physical strength, but of monstrous psychological endurance. It is the complete dissolution of personal identity into the mission. Such feats would have been impossible without a vast support system, without the individuals who remained behind the scenes of history. The image of the lone ninja, the versatile genius, that's a convenient myth. In reality, their success was the result of seamless teamwork, where everyone was an indispensable cog in the overall mechanism. And among these unsung heroes were figures whose roles were no less crucial than that of the field agent, yet they are almost never discussed. Without them, the entire vaunted shinobi machine simply wouldn't have moved. Take, for example, the master blacksmith from a shinobi village. He wasn't just a simple armorer. He was, in essence, the head of a research and development department. In his dimly lit workshop, redolent with the scent of hot metal and charcoal dust, not just swords were born, but true engineering masterpieces. It was he who conceived and crafted the specialized tools that gave the ninja their edge. Foldable multi-sectional spears that could be carried beneath clothing. The famous grappling hook, or kaginawa, with perfectly balanced weighting for throwing. Unique shinobi katana swords, shorter and straighter than a samurai's katana, often with an enlarged handguard, tsuba, that could be used as a step to scale a wall. He was a genius of miniaturization and multifunctionality, and the agent's life directly depended on the quality of his work. Or let's talk about a role that, in popular culture, has been encrusted with the most ludicrous myths, that of the female ninja, or kunoichi. Forget the image of a seductress in a skin-tight costume. Their actual function was far more subtle and effective. Kunoichi were masters of social intelligence. In feudal Japanese society, where rigid hierarchies prevailed, a female servant, nun or performer could gain access to places an armed man would never be allowed. The inner chambers of a castle, the daimyo's harem, the circle of his wives and concubines. And it was precisely there, in informal settings, that the most important secrets were discussed, intrigues were spun, and decisions were made. A Kunoichi's weapons weren't poisons and daggers, but the ability to listen, observe, and build trust. She might work undercover as a maid in a castle, discreetly studying its layout, eavesdropping on conversations, and reading discarded letter drafts. She could infiltrate as a companion to the wife of an influential samurai and, word by painstaking word, extract information about her husband's moods, plans, and fears. Their work was slow, meticulous, and demanded incredible self-possession and acting talent. They were analysts and psychologists operating at the highest level, yet history has preserved almost none of their names. And here's a striking everyday detail that grounds this entire story and reveals the comprehensive nature of their discipline: the Shinobi diet. It was strictly regulated and pursued a single goal: to make the body as light, enduring, and silent as possible. They avoided meat and strongly scented foods so their own body odor wouldn't betray them to dogs or keen-sensed sentries. The foundation of their diet consisted of unpolished rice, millet, vegetables, tofu, and special nutritional pills that allowed them to go days without food. This diet not only made them lighter and more agile, but also enabled them to control their bodily functions, ensuring that a sudden cough or stomach rumble wouldn't sabotage a multi-hour ambush. So, when we look at the figure of a shinobi, we shouldn't see just one person. We should envision behind him the brilliant blacksmith who forged his tools. We should see the network of informants, among whom Kunoichi played a pivotal role. We should see an entire culture, a miniature civilization, where even food choices were subordinated to the overarching objective. The human element here isn't a weakness, it's the bedrock of the entire system. A system built on incredible dedication, collective effort, and an attention to detail that their enemies never even considered. For nearly 2 centuries, the shinobi system operated like a perfectly tuned mechanism. They were the shadowy kings of the Sengoku period, the invisible hand guiding the course of history. Their reputation was such that the mere suspicion of their presence could paralyze the will of an enemy commander. It seemed this system, born of chaos and perfectly adapted to it, was invulnerable. It could adapt to any adversary, infiltrate any fortress, break any defense. But history is the science of the unexpected. And in the late 16th century, a player emerged who refused to abide by the old rules. His name was Oda Nobunaga, and he became the perfect storm that crashed down upon the world of the shinobi. Oda Nobunaga was a new breed of man, a brutal, pragmatic, and utterly ruthless genius, obsessed with the idea of uniting Japan under his rule. For him, the independent, uncontrolled clans of Iga and Kōga weren't merely tools to be hired, but a thorn in his side, a threat to the very concept of a centralized state. He had no need for their services because he had no intention of waging a war of intrigue. He waged a war of total annihilation. In his world, there was no room for grey areas, for independent players. You either swore fealty to him, or you were ground to dust. And the ninja, whose power lay precisely in their autonomy, became his #1 target. In 1579, Nobunaga's son, Oda Nobukatsu, made the first move to subjugate Iga, but his invasion ended in utter disaster for the invaders. A 10,000-strong samurai army was lured deep into the mountain passes and utterly annihilated by a force a mere fraction of its size. The shinobi employed guerrilla tactics, cunning traps, intimate knowledge of their homeland, and psychological warfare to send their foes into a panicked, headlong retreat. This triumph, it seemed, only cemented their legend and proved their apparent invincibility. They had once again demonstrated the effectiveness of their unique system. But this victory carried a fatal price. It transformed Oda Nobunaga from a mere adversary into a mortal enemy, consumed by a burning thirst for vengeance. Then, in 1581, the perfect storm finally broke. Nobunaga returned. But this time, he wasn't interested in playing tactical games. He unleashed the full, terrifying might of his military machine upon the tiny province of Iga. An army numbering anywhere from 40,000 to 60,000 strong poured into the valleys from 6 different directions simultaneously. This was no longer a military operation. It was a punitive campaign with one singular, chilling objective: total and absolute annihilation. Nobunaga's forces didn't bother trying to draw the shinobi into open combat. Instead, they simply burned everything in their path: villages, ancient temples, entire forests. They killed indiscriminately, men, women, and children alike. They methodically obliterated the very habitat, the unique ecosystem that had nurtured and given birth to the ninja phenomenon. And this is where the cruel paradox of strength and weakness truly revealed itself. Their legendary elusiveness, born from an intimate connection to their homeland, suddenly became their Achilles' heel. It's impossible to remain unseen when your home and your ancestral forests are ablaze. The very decentralization and lack of a unified command that had granted them such agility in guerrilla warfare now turned against them when faced with the need to repel a massive, organized army. They stood no chance whatsoever in open combat. Their strength lay in avoiding direct confrontation, but Nobunaga brought the battle directly to their doorstep, leaving them no option. Their greatest advantage, their mastery of covert warfare, proved utterly useless against a brutal, total force that simply scorched the earth beneath their feet. The slaughter was horrific. Historical accounts speak of thousands upon thousands dead. The clan's entire infrastructure was shattered. Their homes were burned to ashes, their families wiped out. It was, in essence, a miniature genocide aimed not merely at destroying people, but at obliterating an entire unique culture, a complete way of life. The formidable intelligence network of the Sengoku period was utterly broken, trampled, and consumed by flames. It had faced a challenge for which it was utterly unprepared: the dawn of a new world, a world of centralized order forged in iron and fire. The intricate machine was broken. Survivors were scattered, relentlessly pursued, stripped of their homes and their power. Their world, built on strategic chaos, was systematically dismantled by a man consumed by an unwavering vision of order. And for those who survived this fiery maelstrom, one monumental question loomed. Was this the absolute end of their story, or merely its bloodiest, most tragic, and profound metamorphosis? So, it might seem we've found our answer. Oda Nobunaga arrived, scorched the shinobi's nest to the ground, and brought an end to their saga. But here, we must exercise a degree of intellectual honesty. History is rarely so straightforward, so conveniently linear. Many modern historians, meticulously sifting through the few fragmented documents that survived, propose an alternative theory. They contend that the Iga massacre, devastating as it undeniably was, did not represent a total and absolute annihilation. While it certainly broke the clan's spine as an independent military power, it did not erase them from the face of the earth. Nobunaga's chronicles, much like any victor's official reports, might have deliberately inflated the scale of the destruction to magnify his triumph and serve as a grim warning to any who dared defy him. According to this intriguing perspective, the disappearance of the ninja wasn't the singular consequence of one cataclysmic event, but rather a far more intricate and drawn-out process, one where not only brute force played a role, but also the cunning machinations of economics and politics. To truly grasp this, we need to peel back the financial layers of their existence. The Iga and Kōga clans weren't simply bands of brigands or some mystical order. First and foremost, as we recall, they were communities of jisamurai, small-time landowners. Their primary source of income was agriculture. but ninjutsu became their unique and incredibly lucrative venture project. Hiring shinobi for a complex mission commanded colossal sums of money. Imagine a daimyo planning a castle siege. A siege means months of time, enormous expenses to maintain an army, thousands of lives, and an unpredictable outcome. Now, consider the alternative. Hire a shinobi squad to burn the castle's food supplies overnight, rendering its defense impossible. The cost of such an operation could be equivalent to a small province's annual income. Yet compared to the expenditures of a full-scale war, it was a deal with an incredible return on investment. The shinobi were, quite literally, the most efficient financial instrument in the military economy of that era. It was precisely this economic model that constituted their hidden vulnerability. Their wealth and influence stemmed directly from chaos itself. The more wars and intrigues that festered, the higher the demand for their specialized services. They were the ultimate beneficiaries of fragmentation. And for Oda Nobunaga, who was meticulously forging a unified, centralized state, their very existence represented not just a military threat, but an economic one. They embodied an uncontrolled market for private military services, undermining his burgeoning monopoly on violence. By obliterating their bases in Iga, he wasn't merely seeking revenge for his son's defeat, he was uprooting the very economic model that fueled the region's independence. He wasn't just striking at warriors, he was targeting their resource hub, their headquarters, and their production facilities. But the most cunning blow to the world of the shinobi wasn't dealt by Nobunaga. It was delivered by his successor, the man who ultimately unified Japan, Tokugawa Ieyasu. Ieyasu was a far more subtle politician. After Nobunaga's death, when the surviving shinobi of Iga found themselves without a home or patrons, Ieyasu didn't pursue their destruction. Instead, he made a stroke of genius. He hired them. He took a contingent under his wing, led by the legendary Hattori Hanzo, and made them his personal guard and intelligence service. This move was far more than a pragmatic decision. It was a political manifesto of immense power. What, then, was the hidden meaning behind this action? By hiring Japan's most notorious and dangerous mercenaries, Tokugawa sent a potent signal across the entire nation. First, he demonstrated mercy and wisdom, contrasting sharply with Nobunaga's brutality, thereby attracting those who feared Oda's reign of terror. Second, and crucially, he symbolically tamed chaos itself. He took the most unpredictable and anarchic force of the Sengoku period and brought it into his service, transforming independent contractors into state employees. He effectively monopolized the ninja brand. From free agents of war, they were transformed into palace guards and secret police. Thus, their disappearance is a drama in 2 acts. In the first act, Nobunaga physically annihilated them as an independent force, destroying their home and their economy. In the second act, Tokugawa Ieyasu performed their spiritual disarmament, assimilating the survivors, stripping them of their autonomy, and most importantly, their mystique. He brought the shadows into the light, granting them official status and placing them under state control. He didn't kill them, he gave them jobs. And that, it turns out, was a far more effective way to end the world of the shinobi than any genocide. And so, having journeyed all this way, from their paradoxical disappearance to the bloody Iga massacre, from dissecting their engineering genius to understanding the economics of chaos, the picture becomes strikingly clear and at the same time profoundly tragic. We have glimpsed their world, saturated with the scent of pine needles and betrayal. We have comprehended their philosophy, where survival was valued above ritual. We have peered under the hood of their machine and found no magic, only cold calculation and profound knowledge. We have witnessed how this machine collided with the relentless force of a new order. The time has come to weave all these threads together and formulate the definitive unraveling of the great shinobi phenomenon. Our initial question was, how could the most effective secret organization of its era vanish so swiftly and without a trace? Now, we understand the question itself was fundamentally flawed. They didn't disappear as a result of defeat. They weren't exterminated to the last person. The truth is far more nuanced and unforgiving. The Iga and Kōga clans weren't destroyed. They were nullified. They weren't erased by the sword, but by a radical alteration of the very reality in which they existed. They were the most perfect predator in their particular aquarium, but history simply came along and drained that aquarium down to the very last drop. So, what is the true secret of their phenomenon? It isn't that they were brilliant assassins or spies. Dozens of clans boasted excellent warriors within their ranks. The genius of the shinobi lay elsewhere. They weren't merely a product of chaos, they were its perfect, distilled embodiment. Their philosophy, their tactics, their social structure, even their diet, all of it was honed for optimal functioning in a world without rules, in a Gekkokujo era where alliances crumbled overnight and loyalty was just a bargaining chip. They didn't just survive in chaos, they fed on it. They were its immune system, its regulators, its ultimate manifestation. In essence, the shinobi were a living organism, exquisitely adapted to a very specific habitat, the feudal fragmentation of Japan. They were like deep-sea fish, whose bodies are engineered to withstand the crushing pressure at the ocean's floor. Their elusiveness, their intricate networks, their ability to melt into society, all of this worked only in the murky waters of constant internecine strife. And when the architects of a new world stepped onto the historical stage, they didn't attack the shinobi themselves, they attacked their habitat. This blow was delivered in two phases by two ingenious and ruthless masters. Oda Nobunaga was like a volcano that reshaped the landscape. His invasion of Iga was an act of terraforming. He didn't merely kill people, he scorched the very ecosystem, the forests, the villages, the social bonds that gave rise to the shinobi. He drained their swamp with brute force. But Tokugawa Ieyasu acted even more subtly. He was like an engineer who changes the chemical composition of the water itself. By enlisting the survivors into state service, he fundamentally altered their nature. He transformed free predators who thrived on chaos into the leashed hounds of order. He stripped them of their most vital possession, their very purpose. In the world of the great peace of Tokugawa, where all roads were controlled and every daimyo was monitored by shogunate officials, the need for professional saboteurs and independent spies simply evaporated. Their genuine genius lay in their ability to transform the greatest fear of their era, uncertainty, into their most potent weapon. Where a samurai saw chaos and dishonor, a shinobi saw opportunities and resources. They were masters of asymmetric responses long before the term was even invented. Their story isn't just a chapter in Japan's military history, it's a fundamental lesson about the nature of systems. Even the most perfect, most adaptive, and most lethal system is doomed if the basic rules of the game change. They weren't defeated by a stronger warrior. They were defeated by a stronger idea, the idea of a unified, stable, and predictable state. Therefore, when we contemplate their disappearance, we shouldn't perceive the tragedy of defeat. We should see the inevitable end of a biological species whose habitat vanished. The world simply evolved, and in its new version, there was no longer any room for them. They were too perfect, too specialized for survival in the past to find a place in the future. And in this lies the true scale of realization. This is no longer just about politics or warfare. This is a design of titanic, almost divine proportions. It's a demonstration of how the relentless march of order grinds down and assimilates even the most brilliant offspring of chaos. The shinobi didn't lose. They simply became incompatible with the new version of the world. Their operating system, honed for an age of warfare, proved useless in the age of peace that followed. And history, without mercy, consigned them to the archives. One would think that with the dawn of the Edo period, the story of the shinobi drew to a close. Their bases were razed, their clans scattered, their very art rendered obsolete. They mutated into figures of campfire tales and stage plays, gradually shrouded in myth and stripped of their true essence. Yet, genuine legacies never truly vanish. Like invisible ink, it surfaces on the pages of history in the most unforeseen corners. And the domino effect, set in motion by the ninja, has reverberated through the ages, reaching our present day and reshaping the world in ways they could never have fathomed. The first and most direct ripple effect of their activities was the genesis of Japan's intelligence agencies. When Tokugawa Ieyasu co-opted the surviving shinobi into his service, he unwittingly established a powerful precedent. He founded the Oniwaban, a corps of gardeners who, in reality, served as his personal guard and clandestine police force. Their mission, to safeguard Edo Castle, monitor potentially disloyal daimyo, and gather intelligence from every corner of the realm. Essentially, this marked Japan's inaugural centralized and perpetually operating state security apparatus. The methods forged in the mountains of Iga, intelligence gathering, infiltration, rumor analysis, counter-espionage, were swiftly assimilated by the state. Thus, an anarchic force, born from resistance to authority, was transformed into its premier instrument of control. This impulse has echoed through the centuries, and even today, within the operational tenets of modern Japanese intelligence agencies, one can discern the lingering shadows of those very principles, meticulously honed during the Sengoku period. The second legacy, one we unknowingly wield, resides within the boundless realm of popular culture. Paradoxically, it was precisely the ninja's transformation into myth that cemented their immortality. During the peaceful Edo period, when the true shinobi had all but faded into obscurity, their image was eagerly appropriated by artists, writers, and kabuki theater dramatists. They were the architects of what would become the quintessential Hollywood archetype: the black suit, mystical powers, and the lethal flurry of shuriken. The stagehands in kabuki theater, cloaked in black to remain invisible to the audience, served as the visual blueprint for the iconic ninja costume. Thus, the real master of disguise evolved into an iconic shadow warrior. This image proved so potent and captivating that by the 20th century it had captivated global cinema, emerging as one of Japan's most recognizable symbols, eclipsing even the samurai. Modern James Bond films, espionage thrillers, and stealth genre video games all, at their core, draw upon the same fundamental concept as the shinobi: a protagonist who triumphs not through brute force, but through intellect, cunning, and technological prowess. And finally, let us delve into the profound paradox of their legacy. The original ethos of ninjutsu, as we recall, was centered on survival. It was an art meticulously crafted for the defense of one's land and autonomy. It embodied the philosophy of the disenfranchised, compelled to employ intellect to stand against brute strength. Over time, however, and particularly after their assimilation by the state, this core concept was twisted beyond recognition. From an instrument of defense, it morphed into a tool of aggression and dominion. From a philosophy of survival, it became a technology of assassination. And in popular culture, it transmuted into its complete antithesis. From the art of invisibility and blending seamlessly with the crowd, it evolved into a symbol of flamboyant, defiant individualism, borderline superheroism, in fact. The most striking illustration of this distortion is the shuriken, that renowned throwing star. In reality, it was a supplementary diversionary tool, a means to momentarily disorient an adversary and facilitate escape. In cinema, however, it has been reimagined as a lethal blade, capable of striking targets with uncanny precision. Thus, a pragmatic instrument of survival transformed into a dramatic emblem of assassination. And therein lies the ultimate irony. The shinobi, who throughout their lives strive to remain in the shadows and shun attention, ultimately became, after their historical demise, some of the most flamboyant and widely disseminated figures in global culture. Their greatest art, the art of vanishing, ultimately turned against them, transforming them into an eternal myth that has almost entirely obscured their authentic, far more intricate and poignant history. It might seem that the tale of shadow warriors from feudal Japan is merely a captivating journey into a distant past. But if we scrutinize it more closely, their drama, a clash with a new world, resonates with astonishing precision in our 21st century reality. We are ourselves both witnesses and participants in a remarkably similar process. The early internet, with its decentralization, anonymity, and spirit of freedom, was a kind of digital Sengoku period. It was a wild, unpredictable world that gave rise to its own lone geniuses, its own digital shinobi, hackers, independent developers, pioneers of online communities who valued autonomy above all else. Yet today, that chaos is rapidly giving way to order. The thousands of independent websites and forums have been superseded by a new shogunate, a handful of global corporations that centralize information flows, impose their rules, and methodically pacify the digital space. The independence and anonymity that were once paramount values are now increasingly viewed as threats. Skills that once ensured survival in that wild digital frontier become either irrelevant or overtly criminal in the new, regulated, and controlled ecosystem. These digital shinobi are either assimilated, taking jobs within corporations, or marginalized, driven deep into the underground. And here we arrive at the main, non-trivial lesson that the history of the ninja imparts to us. It's not the simplistic adapt or die. The lesson runs far deeper. The effectiveness of any system is determined not by its inherent complexity or perfection, but by its alignment with its environment. When the environment shifts, a system's greatest strength can instantaneously become a fatal flaw. Ninjutsu was a perfect, exquisitely honed tool for an era of utter uncertainty. But it was precisely this perfection that rendered it utterly inflexible and fragile in the face of an encroaching order. This logic is universal. It applies to business, where a company that has perfectly refined its model for a stable market finds itself bankrupt after a single technological leap. It applies to science, where a brilliant scientist who has dedicated their life to one paradigm cannot embrace a new one that upends all their preconceptions. It even applies to our personal lives. Excessive specialization and perfect adaptation to current conditions make us incredibly vulnerable to a future that always arrives unannounced. The story of the shinobi is a profound reflection on the eternal conflict between chaos and order. We instinctively yearn for order, security, and predictability, and there is nothing inherently wrong with that. The Great Peace of the Edo period granted Japan 2.5 centuries without war. But we must understand that every order comes with a price, and that price is diversity. Order, by its very nature, strives for unification, for the elimination of anomalies, for bringing everything to a single standard. It weeds out undesirables without discerning whether some of them might be rare and valuable species. Therefore, to offer a preliminary summation, we can say this. The history of the shinobi is a bitter reminder that every order, even the most desirable one, has its cost. And more often than not, that cost is paid by the very unique, brilliant, and vibrant phenomena that could only have been born from the fertile and unpredictable soil of chaos. They vanish not because they were flawed or weak, but because in the new, meticulously arranged garden, there simply isn't a place for them. Until now, we have viewed this history through the eyes of the shinobi, marveling at their ingenuity and sympathizing with their tragedy. But for the full picture to emerge, we are compelled to perform an intellectual somersault and view the world through the eyes of their adversary, the samurai establishment. And here, it is critically important to shed the caricatured image of an arrogant and dull-witted warlord. The force that opposed the ninja was not a crude band of barbarians. It was a complex, ancient, and self-sufficient civilization with its own unshakable logic, its own truth, and its own profound understanding of honor. The world of the samurai was a world of order, hierarchy, and ritual. It was a system designed to contain chaos, not to engender it. For the samurai, war, no matter how brutal, possessed its own grammar, its own syntax. Rules existed, even if unwritten. Battles unfolded on designated fields. Armies met face to face. Valor was measured by bravery displayed for all to witness. Death in combat was the ultimate act of self-realization. Their entire culture, from poetry to the sword ceremony, was imbued with the ideals of beauty, order, and predictability. Their world was built upon concepts of duty, loyalty, and a family name to be glorified or shamed. It was a world where form was often no less significant than substance. And then, into this ordered, ritualized world, burst the shinobi. For the samurai consciousness, this was an absolute cultural shock. Imagine their horror and utter incomprehension. The enemy wore no clan crest. He did not engage in duels. He did not attack in broad daylight. He infiltrated your home disguised as a merchant. He poisoned your food. He murdered you in your sleep. From the perspective of samurai ethics, this was not merely dishonorable. It was utterly repugnant. This wasn't war. It was akin to a disease, an epidemic that ravaged society from within. In their eyes, the shinobi were not warriors. They were anti-warriors. They were a social heresy, a virus that shattered the very fabric of their world, which was built on the trust between vassal and lord. Now, let us flip the mirror. How wild and incomprehensible must the samurai themselves have seemed through the eyes of the shinobi? Imagine a pragmatic spy from Iga observing a samurai encampment. He sees warriors squandering precious time on poetry tournaments and tea ceremonies before a battle. He sees generals whose wounded pride drives them to hurl their troops into suicidal charges. He sees a system built on a notion of honor as fragile as ice, so easily exploited against themselves. To the shinobi, the samurai's obsession with ritual and public display was not valor, but blatant inefficiency and vulnerability. This wasn't merely a conflict between two armies. It was a clash of two operating systems, two utterly incompatible ways of thinking. And herein lies the tragedy of predictability. The samurai system was incredibly strong within the confines of its own logic. Their castles were impregnable to frontal assault. Their heavy cavalry was lethal on an open field. Their code of honor ensured ironclad discipline. But these very strengths became their paramount weakness in the face of an entirely new mode of thought. They were prepared to repel any threat they could conceive. But they could not even imagine an enemy who wouldn't storm their castle, but simply seep through its walls and open the gates from within. Their fortresses, those gigantic stone behemoths, were symbolic of their mindset. They were constructed to withstand force, but they were defenseless against cunning. The more rooms, corridors, and servants a castle contained, the easier it was for an enemy agent to disappear within it. The higher the walls, the greater the defenders' overconfidence, lulling them into complacency. The samurai prepared for symmetrical warfare, for a clash of sword against sword, army against army. But the ninja offered them asymmetrical warfare, a war of nerves, rumors, and poisons. Therefore, when samurai armies repeatedly suffered humiliating defeats at the hands of the elusive shadows from Iga, it was not a defeat of strength. It was a defeat of imagination. Their system was so rigid and ordered that it became systemically blind to a threat operating entirely outside the rules. They were like a mighty battleship that fails to notice a torpedo heading beneath the water. And it was precisely this total incomprehension that ultimately compelled Oda Nobunaga to resort to the only method he deemed adequate, not to fight the virus, but to burn to the ground the entire environment in which it could possibly exist. We admired their engineering prowess, their psychological finesse, their uncanny ability to thrive where others saw only doom. But this genius also harbored a shadow, a darker facet. No, this wasn't the demonic sorcery whispered in legends. Instead, it was a cold, calculating, and at times monstrous pragmatism, an inescapable consequence when the sole measure of all things becomes the outcome. Their philosophy, taken to its chilling extreme, demanded not merely sacrifices, but a ceaseless erosion of human decency through constant moral compromises. The most terrifying of these was the readiness to immolate not only an enemy, but an innocent life, or even a trusted comrade, should the mission demand it. Imagine an agent toiling for months within a castle's walls, disguised as a humble gardener. One night, as he meticulously copied secret documents, he chances upon a young maidservant who has merely stepped out for a breath of fresh air. She recognizes him. She poses no threat. She simply found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. In the rigid world of samurai honor, perhaps he might have attempted to intimidate her or bind her. But within the ruthless logic of the shinobi, any witness equates to a mission failure. And a mission failure means the deaths of dozens, if not hundreds, of his kin in the looming battle. And so, he stands before a choice, one already dictated by his rigorous training. He must eliminate her, silently, dispassionately, as one would remove any other obstacle. This is not an act of malice, it is an act of systemic imperative. And their history is riddled with thousands of such acts. Their path to triumph was paved not merely with the corpses of their foes, but with the innocent lives crushed beneath the grinding gears of their grand machine. Now, let us peer even deeper into the inner world of the shinobi themselves. What becomes of a person whose life is an endless tapestry of deceit? How does the crushing weight of perpetual secrecy, the profound loneliness at the very heart of enemy society, and the constant readiness for betrayal at a moment's notice reshape one's character? The philosophy of nin, patience and stealth, in practice transmuted into a slow, corrosive decay of the self. An agent, living for years beneath a fabricated identity, risked losing their true self entirely. Their smiles were masks, their words meticulously calculated, their friendships mere tools. That very shinobi, who married and started a family for the sake of a cover story, had to remember, deep within their soul, that their family was nothing more than a part of the legend, expendable material. And should the mission demand it, they would be compelled to betray their trust without hesitation, perhaps even sacrifice them. This transformed a person, originally a defender of their land, into a burnt-out, hollowed-out shell with nothing left inside but the unyielding objective. This gnawing paranoia permeated not only their interactions with the outside world, but also the very fabric of the clan from within. The system of collective responsibility, the renowned Gonin-gumi, groups of 5 individuals where the failure of one meant retribution for all, proved an effective instrument of control. Yet, it simultaneously bred absolute distrust. Every shinobi was not merely a comrade, but also a potential overseer for the others. Any perceived weakness, any flicker of doubt, any misstep could cost not only your life, but also the lives of your friends. This cultivated monstrous psychological pressure. In a world where you couldn't even trust your brothers in arms, the sole remaining anchor was the faceless, all-consuming mission. It was a tyranny of purpose that devoured human connection. To truly illuminate the real, tangible cost of these ambitions, a story must be told. A tale that unfolded hundreds of times, yet remained largely unwritten. The story of 2 friends, let's call them Kaede and Isamu, who grew up together in a village in Iga. Together they learned to navigate bamboo groves. Together they mastered the art of silent movement. They were dispatched on a mission to infiltrate a fortress and map its vulnerabilities. During their exfiltration, a patrol spotted them. A brief, fierce skirmish ensued. Isamu was severely wounded in the leg. He could not flee. He knew that capture meant inevitable torture, a torment that would break anyone, forcing him to divulge everything: the plan, his friend's name, and their escape routes. The moment the distant sounds of pursuit echoed, not a single word was exchanged between them. Isamu looked at Kaede with a gaze that held both a plea and a command. He extended his dagger. This was the ultimate act of loyalty, not to his friend, but to his mission and his clan. And Kaede, suppressing every human instinct within him, carried out this final, unspoken request. He retrieved the map, left his friend's body, and vanished into the night. He had completed the assignment. The clan received vital intelligence that saved hundreds of lives. Yet this victory was bought at a price no one would ever know. It was paid with the soul of a man forced to kill the one he considered a brother. This, then, is the true dark side of the shinobi genius. It isn't mystical rituals, but a terrible, precise logic that elevates the system above the individual and outcome above morality. Their effectiveness was inextricably linked to this ruthlessness. They constructed the most sophisticated machine of clandestine warfare of their era, but the fuel for this machine was not only the lives of their enemies, but their very own souls. When the armies of Oda Nobunaga and later the administrators of Tokugawa Ieyasu descended upon the lands of Iga and Kōga, it wasn't a cultural dialogue that began. It was a clash, harsh and uncompromising. Imagine, on the site of a raised shinobi village, where every home was part of a defensive system with secret passages, the new authorities erected a standardized samurai outpost. Instead of stealth, there was overt power. Instead of harmony with the landscape, there was domination over it. It was an architectural manifesto. The age of shadows was over, and an age of light had dawned, a light that would emanate from the shogun's castle, piercing every corner. The philosophy of secrecy, which had been the key to survival for centuries, overnight became a mark of disloyalty and subversion. This was not synthesis, but initially, aggressive suppression. Shinobi knowledge of poisons, explosives, crowd psychology, all the unique intellectual capital they possessed, was outlawed. Their more pragmatic, almost cynical worldview, where results were valued over ritual, was perceived as heresy, an insult to the samurai code of Bushido. Those who held this knowledge were either eliminated or coerced into forgetting it. The oral tradition, which had been the primary form of passing down skills from generation to generation, was broken. Fathers, who once taught their sons the art of silent movement, were now forced to teach them etiquette and humiliating bows before shogun officials. But ideas, especially effective ones, cannot be entirely eradicated. They can only be suppressed, and then they begin to mutate, creating the most astonishing and strange hybrids. The most vivid example of this is the birth of the shogun's state intelligence services, the very Oniwaban. This is the Japanese equivalent of Greco-Buddhism, a strange child of two warring worlds. Outwardly, it was an absolutely samurai structure. Strict hierarchy, absolute loyalty to the shogun, official status. But its methods, its operational system, were pure ninjutsu. They employed techniques of disguise, infiltration, intelligence gathering, all the very things for which their ancestors were burned in their own homes. It was the greatest historical paradox. A state built on the idea of total order adopted the most sophisticated technologies of chaos to protect that order. Another, equally strange hybrid emerged on the stages of kabuki theater. Once the real threat from the shinobi faded, their image was captured by popular culture. Playwrights and actors took fragments of real stories, blended them with folk superstitions about Tengu demons, and created an entirely new character, a superhuman in a black suit, wielding magic and capable of flight. Thus, the pragmatic survival expert mutated into a mystical superhero for the entertainment of city dwellers. This theatrical hybrid proved so resilient that it completely supplanted the real image of the shinobi in popular memory. And it was this figure, not its historical prototype, that went on in the 20th century to conquer the world through cinema. And how did the life of an ordinary person suddenly caught at this cultural crossroads change? For a young man from Iga in the early 17th century, the world turned upside down. His grandfather had been a respected master whose services commanded a fortune. But now, those very skills were a brand, a mark of infamy. Old habits went underground. The rigorous training that once took place openly was now conducted in secret, under the cloak of night, risking accusations of conspiracy. He faced a cruel choice: either remain loyal to ancestral traditions and condemn himself to poverty and persecution, or serve the new masters, becoming part of the very Oniwaban, using his inherited skills to bolster the power that had shattered his world. The old value system, built on clan independence, crumbled. In its place rose a new one: unwavering loyalty to the state. Ultimately, this grand cultural melting pot proved not to be a place of harmonious fusion, but rather a high-tech blast furnace. Into it, the unique Shinobi culture was cast, and from it, the most valuable and practically useful elements, methods of espionage and counterintelligence, were extracted. Everything else, the philosophy of independence, their distinctive social structure, the very soul of this civilization, was discarded as worthless slag. Thus, a new Japan was born, a nation that learned to wield the darkest arts of its former adversaries to sustain the brightest and longest period of peace in its history. In an era when information traveled at the speed of a courier or a homing pigeon, controlling it was tantamount to controlling reality itself. And the Shinobi of Iga and Kōga were the first to grasp this with absolute clarity. They didn't merely wage a clandestine war, they fought history's first comprehensive information war. And its primary front was the deliberate creation of their own myth. They didn't pen treatises about themselves or boast of their victories. They became a living nightmare, meticulously crafting their public image through whispers, insinuations, and fear. They understood a brilliantly simple truth: an enemy who believes you possess supernatural powers is already halfway defeated. They didn't just use smoke bombs, they did so in a way that mimicked magical disappearances. They didn't merely apply psychological insights, they allowed their enemies to believe they could read minds. This propaganda was built on a subtle game. They actively exploited and encouraged the wildest superstitions about themselves. Legends that ninjas forged alliances with mountain Tengu demons, that they could walk through walls and transform into animals, all of this worked to their advantage. It wove around them an aura of insurmountable, otherworldly power that paralyzed an opponent's will even before a confrontation began. Every one of their successes, even the most mundane, became embroidered with mystical details in popular lore, and they were in no hurry to contradict it. The less truth known about them, the more they were feared. Their principal weapon wasn't a blade, but the imagination of their enemies, which they masterfully steered in their desired direction. Of course, their adversaries didn't stand idly by. The samurai elite launched a powerful counter-propaganda campaign, a true black ops effort aimed at stripping the shinobi of their human semblance. If the ninja created a myth of their superhuman strength, the samurai fabricated a myth of their subhuman baseness. In official chronicles and oral traditions, they were depicted not as skilled warriors, but as despicable mercenaries, dirty assassins willing to commit any treachery for money. They were branded as outcasts from the lowest castes, pariahs devoid of honor, loyalty, or homeland. This was an attempt to erase them from the legitimate social sphere, to transform them into monsters against whom no rules of engagement needed to be observed. And here's the cruel irony. Many of these enemy myths have endured to this very day and cemented themselves as part of the popular image of the ninja. It was samurai propaganda, later amplified by kabuki theater, that branded them as soulless assassins clad in black. The true image of a pragmatic protector of their homeland, a shrewd engineer, and a master psychologist was almost entirely obliterated by this relentless wave of smear tactics. So, the modern Hollywood ninja, in many respects, isn't a product of their own legend, but rather one meticulously crafted by their bitterest enemies to discredit them. Nowhere is the principle that history is written by the victors more vividly illustrated than in the accounts of Oda Nobunaga's invasion of Iga province. Let's examine this pivotal event from two distinct perspectives. The official narrative, enshrined in chronicles commissioned to please Nobunaga, portrays this war as a lightning-fast and triumphant punitive expedition. The righteous wrath of the great unifier descended upon this den of traitors and rebels, wiping it from the face of the earth in a matter of weeks. These reports speak of total annihilation, of tens of thousands slain, and of the complete and unconditional triumph of order over chaos. It was not a war, but an execution. However, the evidence we can glean from later sources and the sheer logic of events paints an entirely different picture. The invasion was no swift blitzkrieg, but a bloody and protracted slaughter. Nobunaga's army, despite its overwhelming numerical superiority, became mired in guerrilla warfare, suffering heavy losses from ambushes, traps, and nocturnal raids. The razing of villages was less an act of retribution and more a gesture of desperation, the only way to deny the guerrillas their operational bases. And crucially, the rout was not absolute. Many shinobi, including their leaders, managed to break through the encirclement and escape into hiding. The best proof of this lies in the fact that just a few years after this alleged total annihilation, we find hundreds of perfectly organized and highly trained warriors from Iga entering the service of Tokugawa Ieyasu. This irrefutably proves that Nobunaga's official version was a propagandistic embellishment. He did win the war, but that victory cost him immense bloodshed and did not result in the complete extermination of his enemy as he wished to portray. Thus, a bloody drama was transmuted into a beautiful legend of triumph, penned by the victor's hand. The Iga massacre, orchestrated by Oda Nobunaga, marked the first point of no return. It physically obliterated the world of the shinobi. But a second, perhaps even more tragic point of no return was crossed later, when the survivors faced a choice that would irrevocably seal their ultimate fate. And this fateful decision, one that irreversibly distorted their original purpose, wasn't imposed by some external force. They made it themselves. This moment arrived when the remnants of the Iga and Kōga clans, led by Hattori Hanzo, accepted Tokugawa Ieyasu's offer and entered his state service. On the surface, it seemed a shrewd and pragmatic move, the only viable path to survival in a radically altered world. But in truth, it was a betrayal of the very essence of ninjutsu. Let's recall the bedrock of their philosophy. It was the concept of independence. Their entire art, their whole social structure, was forged for a singular purpose: to safeguard their homeland and their freedom from the encroachments of powerful daimyo. They were the embodiment of resistance against central authority. They symbolized autonomy, a force subservient to no one, choosing for themselves to whom they would offer their formidable skills. And yet, in one pivotal moment, they voluntarily surrendered this independence. They swore an oath of fealty to the very man who was building the centralized system their ancestors had battled against for centuries. The methods they had honed to defend freedom were now pressed into service for total control. The end no longer justified the means. The means themselves became the end, mere tools in the hands of the new shogun. This decision was far from unanimous. It ignited a profound internal schism among the survivors. Regrettably, history hasn't preserved for us the names or detailed minutes of these debates, yet we can confidently reconstruct their essence. Picture a clandestine council held somewhere deep in the mountains, where the exhausted leaders of the surviving factions, stripped of everything, gathered. On one side stood the pragmatists, the followers of Hattori Hanzo. Their logic was ironclad and unyielding. Our world lies in ruins. Our homeland is no more. The only chance to survive and preserve even a shred of our art is to align ourselves with the most powerful figure, with Tokugawa. Yes, we will forfeit our freedom, but we will gain security and status. It is better to be the shogun's loyal hound than a stray dog to be shot by any samurai. On the other side stood the idealists, those who vividly remembered what this struggle had begun for. Their voices were quieter, but their words carried a bitter truth. By serving Tokugawa, we will betray everything our fathers fought for. We will become precisely what we always despised, mere servants. Our art, born to defend independence, will be used to crush those who, like us once, dare to challenge authority. We will save our lives, but we will lose our soul. It is better to vanish into the forests, remaining true to our principles, than to live in a gilded cage, serving our former enemies. This divide wasn't merely a tactical disagreement. It was a clash of worldviews between two former comrades in arms, one embracing a new pragmatic reality, the other clinging to dying ideals. And the symbolic act that marked this final rupture was the very first assignment Tokugawa Ieyasu gave his new Iga bodyguards. He entrusted them with protecting him during his perilous journey through hostile territories. They executed this task brilliantly, guiding their new lord along secret paths known only to them, the very same paths they had once used to ambush men just like him. In that moment, they ceased to be warriors of Iga. They became Tokugawa's men. They leveraged the sacred knowledge of their homeland, their land steeped in their ancestors' blood, to protect the architect of a new world where their homeland had no place. This crossing of the mountains was more than just a military operation. It was a ritual of passage. They symbolically burned their bridges behind them. Every step along a familiar trail in the service of a new master was a step away from their past, from their very identity. They used the key to their own home to let a stranger in and hand over its dominion. At that moment, the original concept of ninjutsu, the idea of protecting their unique, independent civilization, died completely. And it died not by an enemy's sword, but by their own choice. They chose survival over freedom, and in doing so, signed their culture's death warrant. Their bodies were saved, but their spirit was broken forever. Great upheavals never pass without leaving their mark. They reshaped the social landscape, creating new pinnacles and chasms. And after Nobunaga's fiery whirlwind and Tokugawa's icy order swept through the lands of Iga and Kōga, an entirely new society emerged in their wake. In this new world, there were undeniable winners and tragic losers. The new centralized shogunate bureaucracy, of course, won, and an entire social class lost. The independent ji-samurai, the landed gentry who for centuries had been the backbone of the Shinobi clans. Their autonomy was obliterated. Their unique way of life was deemed criminal. They vanished as a class, transforming either into faceless peasants or into servants of the new regime. In their place arose a new, peculiar elite, the former shinobi leaders who had transitioned into Tokugawa's service. The Hattori family, for instance, received high status, lands, and stipends. They became part of the establishment. But it was a gilded cage. From independent CEOs of the world's most effective private military company, they were demoted to department heads in a vast state corporation. Their status now depended not on their actual skills and successes, but on the shogun's favor. They traded freedom for security, power for a position. And those who rejected this bargain, the idealists who remained true to the old principles, were either hunted down and eliminated or became ronin, dispossessed wanderers, shunned and despised by all. Thus, a society built on principles of a horizontal network and collective defense was replaced by a rigid vertical power structure. The economy of the new world was quite literally built on the bones of the old. The shinobi's economic model, as we recall, thrived on chaos. They sold the most valuable commodities of the Sengoku period, information and asymmetric military solutions. But with the advent of the Great Peace of Tokugawa, this market simply ceased to exist. Demand for professional saboteurs and spies plummeted to zero. It's like if, today, the internet were suddenly banned overnight. The entire economy built upon it would instantly collapse. Iga and Kōga provinces, once a kind of Silicon Valley of medieval military engineering, were transformed into depressed agricultural regions. Their unique product became outlawed. The colossal resources that once flowed into Iga from across Japan in the form of contract payments were now rerouted. The lands of the rebellious clans were confiscated and distributed to Tokugawa's loyal vassals. All trade and intelligence networks, once controlled by Shinobi organizations, now converged on the new capital, Edo. Economic strangulation proved no less effective than military defeat. Deprived of income sources and their unique economic niche, the remnants of the Shinobi clans could never regain their former power. They weren't just defeated, they were entirely disconnected from the new economic reality. But the most profound shifts occurred in the minds of the people. For the massacre's survivors and their descendants, this wasn't the euphoria of an arrived peace, but a deeply ingrained collective trauma. Imagine the psychology of a person whose grandfathers were respected and feared like demigods, but who is now taught to be ashamed of their own heritage. Their unique skills, passed down through generations, became a dangerous secret, one to be hidden even from neighbors to avoid accusations of disloyalty. This fostered a culture of silence and double lives. The worldview of an entire people was forcibly reprogrammed. The philosophy of enin, active survival through cunning and enterprise, was replaced by a Confucian ethic of obedience and service. Their soul's operating system was formatted and swapped out for a new one, compatible with the regime. For the rest of Japan, conversely, it was a time of collective relief. The era of fear and paranoia had ended. There was no longer any need to dread that your gardener might be a spy or a wandering monk, an assassin. The long peace of the Edo period, which spanned 2.5 centuries, was built upon the ruins of the Shinobi world and dozens of other independent powers. And society willingly paid the price, the loss of diversity and regional freedoms, for stability and predictability. The psychology of Civil War survivors is that of people who desire order above all else. And in this new, orderly world, there was simply no place left for shadows. Behind every great historical movement lies a grand idea. The brutality of Oda Nobunaga and the cunning of Tokugawa Ieyasu were not driven solely by a thirst for power. They were underpinned by a powerful philosophical concept that became the ideological bedrock for the unification of Japan. This idea was Tenka Fubu, which can be translated as all under heaven unified by military power. This slogan, which Oda Nobunaga emblazoned on his personal seal, was not merely a catchy phrase. It was a manifesto for a new world order. It signaled the end of an era of feudal fragmentation and the affirmation of the principle that there could be only one source of legitimate power in the country, the central government. This idea was revolutionary, as it completely shattered centuries of tradition and notions of authority. At its core, this concept wasn't about belligerence, but a profoundly pragmatic Neo-Confucian worldview. The intellectual engine, the power behind the throne of this era, wasn't a warrior, but a thinker, the monk Suden. As Tokugawa Ieyasu's advisor, he crafted the philosophical and legal framework for the new regime. Suden and his followers posited that the chaos of the Sengoku period stemmed directly from the breakdown of proper hierarchy. When vassals betrayed their lords and daimyo clashed amongst themselves, all under heaven suffered. The sole path to peace and prosperity lay in re-establishing a rigid hierarchical pyramid, crowned by the shogun whose authority was sanctioned by heaven and bolstered by undeniable military might. Peace through order, order through strength. This philosophy left no room for independent players, whether fortified Buddhist monasteries or ninja clans. Any autonomy was viewed as a cancerous growth on the body politic, demanding immediate excision. Yet, this doctrine of total order was met by an equally potent counter-philosophy, one that formed the unspoken bedrock of the Shinobi world. This was the unwritten, yet deeply ingrained concept of jiza, or self-governance on the land. This concept asserted that every community, every clan, possessed a natural right to self-defense and self-rule. Power, according to this notion, didn't descend from on high, from the heavens, but welled up from below, from the earth itself, from the collective will of the people who lived and toiled upon it. The Shinobi of Iga and Kōga were the most vivid and radical embodiment of this philosophy. They didn't aspire to conquer all under heaven. Their aim was simply for all under heaven to leave them in peace. Their ninjutsu wasn't a tool of aggression, but a shield for their sovereignty. And here we have it, the great ideological clash that shaped the realpolitik of that era. On one side, the centralizing, hierarchical, almost totalitarian philosophy of Tenka-Fubu, which promised peace in exchange for liberty. On the other, the anarchic, decentralized, almost libertarian philosophy of jiza, which valued autonomy above security. This wasn't merely a collision between Nobunaga's armies and the guerrillas of Iga. It was a fundamental conflict between two incompatible visions for Japan's future. We know the outcome of this dispute. The ideal of order prevailed. Why did this happen? Because the Tenka-Fubu philosophy offered something the jiza philosophy couldn't, a universal solution. It promised an end to war for everyone. The Shinobi philosophy at its core was inherently self-serving. It offered a solution only for its own community, its own clan. It was perfect for survival amidst anarchy, but offered no prescription for ending it. And in the end, a society exhausted by a century of warfare made its choice. It chose predictable tyranny over unpredictable freedom. Thus, the story of the Shinobi is more than a mere military or political drama. It is a philosophical tragedy. It's the tale of how an ingenious yet localized idea of self-sufficiency was crushed by the cruder yet universal concept of empire. Their art, their unique civilization, was sacrificed on the altar of a grand project to forge a unified state. And in this sense, their fate was sealed not on the battlefield, but in the realm of ideas, long before Nobunaga's first soldier ever set foot on Iga soil. And so, the Great Peace dawned, the Tokugawa era. For the rest of Japan, it was a blessing. For the Shinobi world, it was a death sentence, executed not by the sword, but by silence. The formidable war machine, honed by 2 centuries of incessant warfare, suddenly ground to a halt. And in that deafening quiet, it began to rust. Just as the system reached its peak adaptability and was forcibly assimilated, it began to unravel under its own weight. There was no longer an external enemy to keep it sharp. No existential threat remained to justify its stringent discipline. Deprived of its purpose, survival in chaos, the system began to devour itself. Entropy took hold. Skills that had once been the very guarantee of life became useless, even dangerous, relics of the past. At this critical juncture, a desperate, even grotesque battle for the Shinobi legacy commenced. The magnificent concept of ninjutsu was dismembered by its self-proclaimed inheritors, each twisting it to their own benefit, stripping away its essence and warping it beyond all recognition. The first claimants to this inheritance were those who pledged allegiance to the shogunate, the pragmatic operatives of the Hattori clan and their ilk. They salvaged the practical elements of the legacy, the intricate arts of espionage, protection, and counterintelligence. But in doing so, they ripped out its very heart, the ideal of independence. In their hands, ninjutsu, once a philosophy of freedom, transmuted into a mere craft of state control. They became the jailers, wielding keys forged by freedom fighters themselves. This marked the first and perhaps most profound act of betrayal, committed in the grim name of survival. A second wave of inheritors emerged in the form of enterprising entrepreneurs of the peaceful age. In the bustling cities of the Edo period, where idle samurai and affluent merchants yearned for exotic diversions, descendants of certain shinobi established ryu, or schools. They peddled the secret art of the ninja to anyone willing to pay. But this was no longer the deadly, comprehensive body of knowledge. It was a commercial product, sanitized of anything truly complex or perilous. Instead of delving into chemistry, psychology, and intricate strategy, they offered acrobatics, theatrical shuriken throws, and a handful of flashy techniques. The sublime art of survival was dismembered and sold off piece by piece like a curious trinket at a carnival. This marked the ultimate vulgarization of the ideal, its reduction to a mere commodity. But the lion's share of the legacy was claimed by a third, even more pervasive force: popular culture. Writers, artists, and the dramatists of kabuki theater crafted their own fantastical image of the ninja. They cherry-picked the most sensational rumors, blended them with folk tales, and conjured a character who bore almost no resemblance to reality, yet proved incredibly popular. Thus was born the enduring myth of the warrior mage clad in black. And this myth proved so potent and captivating that it utterly eclipsed the truth from popular memory. The battle for the legacy was lost by historians and the guardians of tradition, and decisively won by showmen. The true shinobi were relegated to oblivion, their rightful place on the stage of history usurped by their theatrical doppelgangers. And yet, somewhere deep in the Iga Mountains, in a forgotten village, the very last ember still glowed. Picture, if you will, the dawn of the 18th century. An old man, his face etched with the scars not of battle but of time, was the last to recall the stories of his grandfather, a survivor of Nobunaga's brutal purge. He was the final guardian of the true idea in its totality, not a mere compilation of techniques, but a profound world-view. He tried to transmit this wisdom to his grandchildren, but they merely regarded him with bewilderment. They were peasants of an era defined by peace. Why should they master silent movement when no enemies lurked nearby? Why bother memorizing poison recipes when their chief concern was the rice harvest tax? His wisdom, once invaluable, had become utterly futile in the present. He witnessed charlatans in the cities profiting off the name of his ancestors. He heard the theaters mock their memory, transforming tragedy into farce. And in a moment of sheer desperation, he did what his ancestors would have never contemplated. He attempted to commit the oral knowledge to writing, to confine the unbound spirit within a cage of ideograms. It was thus, perhaps, that the scroll known as the Bansen Shukai came into being, not as a textbook for future generations, but as an epitaph for a vanishing world. It was the desperate act of the last torchbearer who knew that after him only ashes would remain. His passing marked the precise moment when the era definitively concluded. With him, the living thread of tradition snapped. Only texts remained, which no one could truly interpret, and myths, which everyone eagerly embraced. The last shard of a magnificent system crumbled into dust, signifying the ultimate triumph of a new world. A world where true ninjutsu had no place and no meaning. With the advent of the great peace of the Edo period, the story of the shinobi didn't merely end, it was buried. For over 250 years, their legacy was systematically relegated to oblivion. The oral tradition, the very lifeblood of their culture, ceased with the passing of its last bearers. Their unparalleled knowledge was either privatized by the state and locked away in shogunate archives, or it degenerated into harmless folkloric rituals. The monumental treatise Bansen Shukai became what Aristotle's works were to medieval Europe before their rediscovery by Arab scholars, a dead text gathering dust on the shelves of a handful of libraries. It was read not as a practical manual, but as a historical curio, a collection of bizarre superstitions from a barbaric past. In the national consciousness, luxuriating in peace and order, the real shinobi, the pragmatist, the engineer, the psychologist, was utterly supplanted by his theatrical caricature from kabuki theater. He became a character in fairy tales, a bogeyman for unruly children. The age of forgetting was almost complete. Then, in the mid-20th century, from the ashes of the Second World War, a slow, almost accidental awakening began. Japan, grappling with a profound identity crisis, started to re-examine its past. In this atmosphere, a few young historians, unsatisfied with the official sanitized version of samurai history, turned to forgotten sources. They weren't seeking magic. They were seeking the truth about how wars were actually waged in the Sengoku period. And it was they, in the quiet solitude of university libraries, who dusted off copies of the Bansen Shukai. This was the moment of rediscovery, and the impact it had within that narrow academic circle was nothing short of an explosion. What they unearthed turned everything on its head. This was no grimoire of spells. It was a military engineering manual, astounding in its pragmatism and scientific meticulousness. Vast sections were dedicated not to mysticism, but to chemistry, pharmacology, meteorology, cryptography, architecture, and social psychology. Recipes for smoke bombs proved to be nitrate-based formulas. Instructions for infiltrating castles read like a modern special forces handbook. For the first time in 300 years, someone peered past the demonic mask and saw the face of an engineer. This revelation was akin to unearthing Leonardo da Vinci's blueprints. It showed that beneath the myth lay a complex, ahead-of-its-time technology. But even as scholars deciphered ancient texts, another, far more powerful process was simultaneously unfolding. Post-war Japanese cinema and subsequently global cinema, hungry for new, compelling heroes, stumbled upon the theatrical myth of the ninja, and this myth proved to be the perfect raw material for mass culture. Ninja films in the 1960s and 1980s ignited a global frenzy. Millions of people around the world, utterly oblivious to Japan's true history, were captivated by the image of the silent warrior in black. This cultural explosion created an enormous demand for all things ninja. And it was this demand that eventually pulled academic research out of the quiet confines of university offices and into the limelight. And here, the most crucial event occurred, the great and inevitable misreading. The 20th century didn't resurrect the 16th century shinobi. It created its own ninja, one that was convenient and comprehensible to its contemporary audiences. New eras interpreted old ideas entirely in their own way, imbuing them with meanings they never originally possessed. For the West, living through the realities of the Cold War, the ninja became the quintessential spy, a medieval James Bond. For adherents of Eastern martial arts, he became the bearer of a secret fighting technique, almost a spiritual guru. For rebellious youth, he became a symbol of non-conformity, a lone wolf challenging the system. Each subculture molded him into its own hero. Thus, the great art of survival morphed into a commercial product called ninjutsu, sold in dojos across the globe. And the pragmatic mercenary who worked for the highest bidder was transformed into a noble avenger defending justice. The irony is that the ninja's second birth did not lead to a resurrection of the truth about him. On the contrary, it spawned a new, even more potent and pervasive myth, which finally buried the fragile historical reality beneath it. We didn't find them. We reinvented them in our own image. We've come full circle. Our investigation began with the paradoxical disappearance of the real shinobi from the stage of history. We sought to find them, to shake off the centuries of dust, the myths and legends that obscured their true image. And what did we ultimately discover? We arrived at a new, even more profound paradox. It turns out the shinobi didn't vanish for good amidst the fires of battle with Oda Nobunaga or within the corridors of power under Tokugawa Ieyasu. No, you and I ultimately obliterated them. Our mass media, our cinema, our video games. We set out to find them, but instead we forged a new, even more impenetrable myth that buried the last vestiges of truth. Thus, the very problem that started it all, the oblivion of true history, returned to us in a transformed guise at the end, but now on a global, insurmountable scale. They were masters of vanishing. Their primary goal was to dissolve, to leave no trace, to become invisible. And in this, they succeeded so completely that they left behind a perfect void. But nature, as we know, abhors a vacuum. And we, their distant descendants, filled that void with our own fantasies, fears, and dreams. They sought to be nobodies, and precisely because of that we could make them into anyone, a superhero, a demon, a spy, a philosopher. They erased their own faces, and we eagerly painted a convenient and commercially successful mask in its place. And here we face the central, irresolvable paradox of this astonishing tale. The quest for absolute oblivion inevitably begets the loudest and most immortal myth. The more successfully they concealed their truth, the more room they left for our fabrications. Their greatest art, the art of invisibility, became the very catalyst for their posthumous, grotesque, and eternal fame. They sought to recede into the shadows, only to find themselves forever trapped beneath the brightest glare of the spotlights. Their story isn't merely a chapter from Japan's past. It's a universal parable about the fate of any complex and singular idea in this world. First, it's born in chaos, a brilliant answer to an insoluble problem. Then comes order, which either obliterates that idea or assimilates it, draining its very essence. And then, centuries later, culture arrives, ultimately transforming its tragedy into entertainment, a commodity, a beautiful yet hollow image. This is an eternal cycle where complexity invariably loses to simplicity and truth to a convenient myth. The Shinobi were neither heroes nor villains. They were a complex, multifaceted, and contradictory phenomenon. But we don't embrace complexity. We crave simple answers and striking images. And without hesitation, we sacrifice their true history on the altar of our desire for amusement. And contemplating all this, a central question arises, one for which there is, and can be, no answer. Is history a spiral, where we are doomed to repeat the same drama on a new turn, a drama in which any new order inevitably devours the most brilliant offspring of chaos, transforming them either into dust or into a harmless fairy tale? Or does humanity still have a chance to learn to cherish and preserve uniqueness without sacrificing it on the altar of yet another grand unification?